I'm super excited to have you on the Business Karaoke podcast because people know you in certain contexts. They know you as the founder behind, now heading into season 3, Make March Matter Facebook community, but they also know you from your Ikigai podcast. And so I'm really looking forward to actually shining light on a little bit of the Jennifer Shinkai, the bit they might not know so much about. So of course we'll touch on Make March Matter, of course we'll touch on the podcast, but the idea of your actual work in systems and metaphors and how that relates to business is not something I related to. I didn't know that's actually where your real fire lies. So I'm super excited to jump into it.
That's mostly what I do with my clients rather than what I do out in the community, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. People don't know that, the community thing is one of those pure volunteer things. So let's actually jump into that. So back in March 2020, when we thought that let's just kind of knuckle down and get through March and like we should be kind of through COVID,
yeah.
you actually lent in to something much more effective and much more value driven than I would say I did. My first COVID reaction was just shock. Like mine was just like shock, but you actually jumped straight in. Do you want to talk a little bit about that initial spark and how that came about and how you've been able to keep that spark alive now for coming up to, as we said, almost 3 years?
Yeah, we're starting the 3rd year. So I also, my initial reaction was shock as well. So all my work was cancelled. Anything that was going to happen, they just said, let's postpone it. Let's see what happens, wait and see. Clients were not, because I have a recruitment background, the first things that go in any kind of financial crash is, and it wasn't so much of a financial crash as it could have been actually for many organizations, but the first things that go is like spending on training and development and recruitment. We're going to put hiring freeze on everything. So anything that kind of happens like that, which makes me think about what's going to be the impact of what's happening right now as we're recording in the world. So we have some resilience around it, but there you go. It's always the thing where people just kind of pull it in. And because the way that I was showing up, similarly to you, was turning up we talked about this on the podcast, that when you were on the other side of the microphone, is showing up in a room with a big group of people, and nobody wanted to do that. So I was like, okay, well, I'm trying to write this book on Ikigai, and the excuse I've said I've not been able to do it is that I've been so busy with work, so I haven't had time for writing. So great, I'm going to have no work on, and so in March I'll finish my book. And that was like on February the 27th or maybe 26th, or anyway, something like that. And then I was in the shower and I was thinking, it can't just be me who's feeling like this. There must be other people whose work's been cancelled. So why don't I just put a shout out, make a little Facebook group? And I kind of had this, it was really interesting. I had a full download of exactly what the program would look like. It's like, we'll meet on Mondays and Fridays, and we'll have like a kickoff and a reflection session. It will be on Zoom. It'll be easy. It'll be times to work for me. And when we first started, we also had like on a Wednesday, a kind of, what's it called? Appreciative inquiry session, like a problem solving session or a solutions focused session, should I say. And I had all that downloaded and all the branding downloaded in my head. And I was like, it just got out. And then the next day, who was the prime minister at the time? Abe-san, Anna. I think when we started in Kobe, it was Abe-san. And then Suga, and now Kishida. Yes, that's right. So Abe-san said the schools are all going to be closed. And I went, okay, well, I'm not going to write my book, but I do have this community now. So let's go. And now it's 400 people plus.
Wow.
We've continued to meet consistently every Monday, 8:30, and every Friday at 5:00. If I can't show up, somebody else facilitates. We have guest speakers. I think we've had about 45 guest speakers, all different topics, including you. Yes. and just many different things, virtual co-working, celebrations. And yeah, it's a really, really lovely place that literally from, an Ikigai perspective, it helped me to get out of bed in the morning, because it was like somebody needs me and I'm having an impact. So the
Mm-hmm.
structure of that really helped.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I find it personally easier to show up for others than for myself. So if I said, so Jennifer, I also know you're a runner. So if I were to say to myself, okay, Brittany, we're going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go for a run, maybe I would do it, maybe I would not, right? It'd be a 50-50 chance. But if I had said to you, okay, Jennifer, I'm going to meet you at 6 o'clock, directly like at this corner, and we'll go running, I promise you with every fiber of my being, I would be there. So yes. I find it easier to show up for others than myself.
Have you seen the work of Gretchen Rubin on the 4 tendencies? Do you know this? I'll check it out later. The 4 tendencies, yeah?
Yes.
So you're a classic obliger like me. And I've done this work with corporates as well. Like there's a 4 tendencies. Sorry, I can't speak today. It's a bad day to be on a podcast. 4 tendencies workshop. And that's really interesting because you understand like how people are motivated and how people are not motivated. And the work that I talk about with inclusion and different perspectives, really understanding that just because it works for you, it doesn't work for someone else. So we might be like, yeah, let's have an accountability buddy. Great. And someone else, that's like never, ever going to work for them. That in fact, they're going to run away from the accountability buddy. And they'll also run away from the content because this accountability piece is so against what they think is necessary for them. So uncomfortable for them. So you lose all the learning. So it's really interesting to look at as a facilitator to go, so my tendency, how I get things done, and other people's tendencies. So how am I designing programs around that, as well as doing a program around it where people go, oh, now I understand that's why you don't deliver things when I ask in this way. So how do I change my internal communications to cover the different tendencies to bring people in?
Right. And I think just listening to this, I think people are starting to get an idea of just how broad your scope and understanding of not only just like doing business in Japan, but just doing business with different kind of people really runs. And I'd love to kind of kick off this conversation with something that I often hear from either small business owners or entrepreneurs, that the question is a lot around the why me, as in how can I get someone to choose me? So for example, we're just talking about the 4 profiles, for example. So of those 4 profiles, understanding who I am helps me authentically show up, but then it also gives me data on how I can then support other people. So I'd love for you to just maybe talk to us a little bit about, and maybe even we take even a step back to maybe even what you're doing now, maybe that there was like some, I always find it easier to understand the present if you look back and look at the past, that's how things start to make sense. I'd love for you to just set the scene on that kind of that topic of authenticity that we were talking about, the idea of how someone should show you as, or why someone should choose you. You and I are, we do a lot of training work, we do a lot of facilitation work. Lots of our business is an extension of who we are. And so getting business and getting clients is often, it's a very personal, it's also a very personal transaction as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So let me start first of all to say, do I believe I turn up 100% authentically in every space that I'm in? Absolutely not. Like, it's definitely still a journey. I still have a lot of masks that I wear. I still have a lot of adaptations that I make. Maybe that's, I don't even know if it is my goal to be 100% authentic all of the time, because there's also a requirement sometimes to have adaptability in order to just get stuff done. Right. But I think that where, I was talking from a global context, there's some things which are in the book Global Dexterity, the author whose name escapes me, but talks about the difference between a competency challenge. Like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't know how to, for example, in a Japanese context, if you're not used to doing nemawashi and building by consensus, and how you have, you know, the pre-meetings and the meetings before meetings, that's just kind of, that's a competency issue, right? It's not, you just need to develop the skill and practice the skill. But where it might come to a challenge, if you have the authenticity challenge, where it feels totally disconnected to your values and like your worldview. So for example, I was talking about this the other day, like I'm fully capable of serving tea in a meeting, right? Competency, not a problem, but authenticity, that I'm doing it because, you know, I was the youngest woman in the room. That was an adaptation that was really uncomfortable for me to do. And so often I didn't do it. And I understand that as a foreigner, it's easier for me to do that than maybe for a Japanese woman who has that authenticity challenge going on with them. But it's like the awareness of where is the mix coming from. Is it competency or is it authenticity? And competency is easier to fix for. But I haven't actually answered your question, but it just made me think of this topic.
That's what business karaoke is all about. Business karaoke is all about tangent.
Just put a different song on.
No, absolutely. Now, would you say that you've always had that? Like you mentioned, for example, being like a younger woman or being a foreign in the room. Have you always felt that you've been able to lean into that, or would you feel that that's maybe something that's developed over time as well?
Definitely over time. Like I feel now I'm in my mid-40s, I'm sort of just leaning into more who I am and not trying to kind of fit in. I remember I'd get a lot of like, do you do things, will you facilitate in Japanese? And a lot of the time I'd be like, yes, I do. And now increasingly I'm like, only if it fits these certain criterias. So don't pull me in for a localization project where I'm going to be delivering your content. Like I'm not the right facilitator for that. But if it's something which
you're just a mouthpiece, then
you're not the
designer.
So I don't think I'm not the best Japanese mouthpiece, right? There's much better Japanese speakers than me, not only native Japanese speakers, but people who it's a second or third language for them, who are much more competent than me. So I'm maybe more comfortable with it. So better to choose them. But I think I used to try a lot more to please people and to be like who they wanted me to be. And now I'm like, actually, that's not why you would hire me. You will hire me because of my difference. You will hire me because I'm bringing this different perspective. You hire me because of all the things of my life that have brought me to this point.
Right.
And that's the feedback that I get from clients who work with me, that's what they've appreciated. I've been in Japan for, over 20 years. So I have understanding of the culture, but I'm also bringing these different perspectives. And then the tools that I use are, I'm using Points of View, which is a coaching game from Israel. It's all about different points of view, different perspectives. And recently in the last year, I got really interested in systems coaching, which is brilliant because one of the basic rules of systems coaching is that every voice is a voice of the system.
Yes.
And that everybody is right, at least partially. So when you come from the perspective that everybody is right, anything is possible. And we open up to like, what would it be like if people, what would it be like if people thought it was okay to do that? What it would be like, and where is that coming from when it's coming from their truth? So I think it's really fascinating. But there was I remember one meeting really early when I was just starting up, and I went along to this big insurance company, and the head of HR, I'd actually been introduced by a member of the board. So kind of she had to meet me. So looking back, I feel a bit sorry for her because there was a bit of, politics in place. Yeah. But she was like, you've just started, you don't have any jiseki, you don't have any experience because you're just starting up. You're a sole proprietorship. It's going to be really hard to get you through with all this lack of experience, plus, getting through our preferred vendor process. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
And of course, I was really upset, after the meeting. And then I went, no, but she's right. She's right. But in a year from now, this won't be true. I'll still be a sole proprietor, and I'm still a sole proprietor now going into year 7. And that's just my choice.
Right.
But yeah, she was right. I didn't have experience. Why should she take a risk on me? So I'm always very grateful for those clients who did, who helped me in those first years too.
That's so interesting. Yeah, definitely that balance between like being authentic, as in this is who I am, but also being able to take on feedback. When someone says to you, look, I'm going to be honest, you have no experience, rather than saying you just don't see my potential, you don't see my value. Like actually being able to leave the meeting and say that hurt a little bit, but actually she's quite right. So what so using that as almost like a platform to then inform your next decision, as in, okay, this is then what to do next. Now talk to me more about the points of view coach, like this coaching method, like that you mentioned that it's from Israel. So it's interesting when I hear sometimes when you say points of view, or when I say it, sometimes I don't know if it's points of view with a V or points of you with a Y, which I think is,
but it's a play. It's a play.
But I guess it's
yes.
It's a play. So talk to us about why that kind of captured your interest, or how that captured your interest.
So what I love about points of view, which does sound like view, and deliberately so, is first of all its playfulness, that it's kind of challenging even by its title, because it's because at the very essence as well, we all have individual, many different points of view inside ourselves. So it's not just Brittany approaches it differently to Jennifer, it's also on a different day, you're going to approach it every challenge differently.
Oh my gosh.
Different selves.
I'm so sorry to jump in here, but like how true is this? How true is this for business karaoke people who are often bilingual and, you know, have their like Japan self, have their global self, and like how true is that? Yes, continue. So true.
Yeah. And it's just as you see, like as you'll show up differently in a conversation with your parents than you would with your colleague, than you would with your partner, you know, so we do have all these different points of view within ourselves. But the essence of points of view is it's a very visual tool. So beautifully taken photos, which are paired often with a topic as well as a question. And it's amazing because it really is limitless in its application. You can use it with children, you can use it with seniors, you can use it with Shin, you know, new grads, you can use it with C-suite, any industry and any topic. So you can talk about it from what's going well, what's not working, what's our ideal client look like. Because we're using the language of metaphors, it really opens up possibility.
Okay, wonderful. So talk us through how we can like imagine how logistically it works. Is it, for example, I say, you know, I want to like rebrand my company, and I look at these pictures, and then I pick up one that means something to me, and I talk about why that meant something or to me, or how does it work?
So again, this is the challenge and also the openness of it. There is not necessarily one set process that works for everything, but what we're looking at is powerful questions. So we might look at things like, what does your ideal client look like for you? And then you can either choose a card like face up or face down. So this is just the first card which I picked up, which is from Flo, the card of gentleness.
Which and has then we're going to baby shoes on it for those that are just listening. It's it's like a little baby shoes with two little cute bows.
Yes. And so we can talk about the picture. What do we see? Why does this make you think about your ideal client? What's missing? What would you like to add? And then we can also look at the word as well and say, what is this word of gentleness? What's the opposite? What does it remind you of? And what does all this have to do with your ideal client? And then if you can imagine, you know, you've got a group of people talking about their perspectives of what the ideal client looks like. We can all look at this card and give our perspectives on this. Or we can look at all the different images and go, so how does that build up like the ideal client avatar? You know, gentle, but maybe someone else is picking. There's actually flow cards a little bit more about in the here and now. Yeah, maybe this one, which is a woman holding a gun, the card of surrender. It's kind of very different to the gentleness picture. But so what is it about that brings the essence of the type of client that we're looking for, or our company culture? So that's kind of one way that you can do it, to create ideas through metaphor. And the great thing I found, especially using it with cross-cultural groups and using it in Japan, is it's quite conflict-free, because there is no right way to see this picture.
Yes.
And it's really, you see diversity in action because people notice different parts that you hadn't even realized. Same card. As I did a workshop the other day, and someone just said it was amazing for me that we had the same card and a completely different story, a completely different interpretation. And you think about how much that happens at work, right? Someone says, let's do this project, and what someone sees as the outcome, but we never talk it through. And that's where people get frustrated. That's where they get disappointed. It's because those perspectives, those points of view are rarely shared, because we assume, we're all in this company together. We all know what this means. We know our culture. Let's go.
Right. The idea that when I share something that you just implicitly understand it in the way I mean it. And the reason why probably we don't even see how often we get that wrong is because we don't walk through it. I noticed that a lot in my work as well, in human-centered design. We lean into, when we're in the problem space, so we believe in, before jumping into the solution, actually making sure you're asking the right questions so that you can solve you can find the right solution. So what I find is that we encourage people, in the West kind of situations, you'll often hear people say things like, it's completely, flat, everyone's the same here, blah, blah, blah. And I tried that approach early on in Japan, and I recognized I'm going nowhere with this. Like me telling Shacho-san and me telling, like Kacha-san and Nai-Nai-san, like that they're all the same. This is getting me absolutely zero. And when I framed it to, I need you to speak as a CEO because there's nobody else who's the CEO in this room. And I need you to speak as the head of accounting because nobody else is the head of accounting. And I need you to speak as the person in the mail room because there's no one else, in the mail room here. And rather than making everyone the same, actually highlighting that everyone is different really did allow for much more conversation. And so when I was interested to hear when you were talking about how this kind of goes in Japan and it not having like a right or a wrong answer, I can really see that might be really helpful. And also Japanese being like quite visual thinkers, like, in terms of like even using kanji, it was one of those things. I can see that you might get some really interesting conversations in Japan while still holding a safe space.
Yeah. Definitely. And when you're doing this work face to face in a room, the great thing is it's a little bit like, I'm not I don't do Lego serious play, but it reminds me of a concept around that too, that we're all looking at the item. So we don't need to make eye contact. So we take away that element of confrontation, right? So we're focused on the card, which can be quite comfortable when we're talking about uncomfortable things, which is an interesting perspective as well.
Like it being a crutch in a way.
Yeah. And it's not that people are necessarily hiding behind it, but it gives permission to share uncomfortable topics, because often in a team, we'll do something like process like what's going well in the team, what's not going well in the team. And you're a bit like, well, there's no gentleness in this team. It's not something which I've been thinking about for a long time, but the card made me say it. Right. And then it can bring the hone out. It can bring the real feeling out a little bit more.
And you were going to say there's one other thing.
Yeah, just something you were talking about before about like letting people lean into their titles and sort of own, like, please speak as the CEO, or please speak as the head of accounting. There's a great and quite sticky process in systems coaching called deep democracy. And what's really interesting in that type of process is anybody can speak as the voice of the CEO on a specific topic, or anybody can speak as the voice of those people who are against. Even if you're not, go and stand in those shoes and talk from that position, talk from that role. And like the empathy and understanding when you step out of only approaching it from like the CEO's perspective, or only approaching it from an accounting perspective. What if I stood in the shoes of marketing? How would I feel differently about this?
If I was
really
marketing,
powerful to see the shifts as well.
do you use points of view coaching and systems coaching together or interchangeably, or are they more complementary, or how does this,
I'm pretty sure I could. I haven't interchanged them yet.
Yeah, well, talk to me a little bit more, for example, about systems coaching. What have you learned, for example, about systems coaching that maybe has kind of added on to your, for example, the point of view method? How has that kind of grown you as a facilitator?
I still feel really a baby in systems coaching. I completed the intermediate program last year, and definitely I'm in that kind of consciously incompetent stage because I'm like, had my mind blown so many times. But I think what is coming up sort of in alignment with all these different approaches is about the importance of listening to all the different voices which are there. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, and it doesn't mean that you have to implement every single voice, but just creating that space for that. And that's also about all the different voices which come up in yourself as well. So like when you're triggered, when you're at your best, which of you is in charge?
Oh my gosh, Jennifer.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yes, because they're different voices. They're absolutely different voices. When you are in your safe space, you have a certain voice. When you are not in your safe space, you probably sound different, probably use even different language as well. Yeah. I would love to hear, because business karaoke people are like, I've learned, are super like action oriented people and love like stories and want to know like how to do things. So you mentioned about giving rise to all the voices in the room, giving rise to all the voices in a room. How would I go about that? Say I'm not a facilitator. Say that I'm not Jennifer Shinkai and I can run the whole show. Say I'm just in a meeting. It's just me. I'm in a meeting with my team, for example. How might I contribute to an environment where where each voice can be heard? Is there something I could do in that setting?
Well, I think, one is very practical. Notice who is silent and invite them to the table. And as you have said as well, like, we haven't heard the perspective from this. What do you think? Now, what is maybe holding that person back is either rank, privilege, or being an uncomfortable voice. So another role you can also play, though, yourself, if you feel that only one type of perspective is being raised. I don't like the term devil's advocate, but if you feel like everyone is only negative about the idea, or everyone is, toxically positive about the idea, like bringing in, the De Bono's 6 thinking hats and making time for what might go wrong. Right, like just great, but like, what are the things we need to be aware of? What might go wrong? Let's spend 5 minutes just talking about potential risks.
Yeah.
If you've got like everyone's risk focused, then like, let's talk about what might be brilliant.
Right. Why it actually might work. I found even what you touched on it without actually explicitly saying it, but time boxing, like spending 5 minutes, like if you're in the meeting, spend 10 minutes talking about why it's good, stop that 10 minutes and then talk about 10 minutes why it's bad. And then when like in the risk conversation, you cannot pick up positives. You can't say no, but blah blah blah. You just hold space for that difficult conversation.
I remember that was one of the things that you said. I think it was maybe an Australian chamber event, and about the time boxing of divergent and convergent thinking, and how when you don't time box it, you slow things down. And I was like, I always talk about this, and I always quote you, kidding, because it just makes so much sense. Because I'm definitely like, I'm like Columbo, right? Is it Columbo? Just one more question, just one more thing, and then like, I don't necessarily solve the crime, but I'm not short of ideas. But you really made me realize there's a time when bringing another idea to the table slows down the whole process. And that's just as damaging as the naysayers early on.
Oh, absolutely. So there's the idea that, in order to move forward, to make change, to work in innovation, to work in just even difficult conversations. Like, imagine we're holding space for difficult conversations. Do you want to be in a difficult conversation for 8 hours, or can we just do it in 90 minutes? Like, if there's a way we can do it it's like, do I need to go running on the treadmill for 30 minutes? Can I max, have a program that gives me my best bang for my buck, and I can do it in 30 minutes, or do I spend 4 hours running? So the idea there was that when we have to move quickly, as in we need speed in terms of communication, because people are busy, we've got a million different things we have to do, innovation doesn't wait for anybody, that we need to be able to keep up with that speed. And the best way to be able to keep up with speed is to have the same conversation. So if I'm having a conversation about risks and you're actually having a conversation about the positives or the benefits, we're actually not having the same conversation. Yeah. We're actually having two different conversations. People often talk about, oh my gosh, facilitating in Japanese must be so difficult. And I'm like, do you know how many times I'm in an English meeting and people are don't understand each other? Yeah. So that was that point. Now, something I learned from you was something I was doing, but I didn't know. And I had no clue as you start, scratching the surface, just how deep this is. So the Business Karaoke podcast, or Business Karaoke, is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for innovation. I'll tell you why. So in IDEO, and where kind of human-centered design first really reached its kind of popularity, they would say things like, these are the design thinking principles. This is how you be a design thinker, right? And there were things like fail fast and no ideas are bad idea and things like this. And I tried translating that, I first tried translating that for Japan. Like, there's no such thing as a bad idea, and hayaku shippai suru, which really is hayaku manabu, like let's learn fast rather than fail fast. But anyway, that's how it's translated in English. And then I recognized this is falling on deaf ears. This is getting me nowhere. And I was actually having a conversation with all people, my husband of all people. And he said, you know what? If only the Japanese were like they were at karaoke. And in that moment, it was like light bulb goes on. And when I started talking about, now for the next 2 hours, or for this workshop, I want you to lean into like your karaoke self, who you are at karaoke. So which means, so if you think about a few things, what does karaoke mean? Karaoke means when someone's singing, you cheer them on, you clap along, you don't tell them that's a bad song or that's a bad idea, but we do that in meetings. If you're not a singer, and you're the best person at ordering drinks, or you make sure everybody has a drink in their hand. And the idea that it's time boxed. We're not going to be doing this for a week. We're going to karaoke for a couple of hours and then it's done. And so when I started recognizing there's actually all these similarities, all these metaphors with karaoke and innovation, I started talking about the karaoke mindset. And then when it came time for the podcast, then it came Business Karaoke. But that being said, that was my experience with metaphors, but you have a completely different level of depth with metaphors. I'd love for you to talk about how you came about using metaphors in business, and how you communicate using these like very aimai, these very like gray concepts with your clients, and how it brings real business value.
I think that maybe points of view was the first time when I really leaned into the power of metaphors, because many of the cards are based on metaphors. And I saw the power of that. And then systems coaching also loves metaphor. And the reason it's powerful is that it kind of separates us from the problem. There's almost a depersonalization. So we're not talking in concrete terms. So that helps to create a certain amount of distance between what we're talking about and how we're talking about it. And because metaphors allow for divergent thinking, right? So they allow us to create much more. And we can look at all the different interpretations of a metaphor. Some people, if you say karaoke, some people, it's their idea of a great night out, and other people, it's the idea of like hell on earth. So even within that, and neither of those are right.
Yes.
Or both of them are right, at least partially. So the idea that even within something that seems maybe to you so cut and dried, actually there's many different ways to look at it. And I think that enables people to get to the heart of the matter in a more expansive way. And then, you know, at the close of the session or to the close of the coaching, we bring the metaphor back into the reality and go, okay, so we've talked about this animal, or we've talked about this theme song. How's that going to show up? And what are you going to do differently in your day-to-day now that you have this new awareness of what's going on with your team or whatever the topic is? And then people are able to like reconnect back to the like the richness of metaphor. It just gives so much more texture and so many more opportunities to have a deeper discussion than if we just talk in concrete terms. And humans love a metaphor. We love storytelling. We are creative beings. So yeah, lean into it.
Do you have a favorite kind of, do you have like, whether it was kind of one that went really bad or one that went really good, do you have any like favorite like metaphor moments that you were working with a group and they stumbled, or they chose a particular metaphor and they really kind of went on a journey with that particular metaphor?
Nothing's coming to my mind straight away, but one story which I remembered, when it was more about kind of place setting and assumptions around what was happening. I was doing a workshop for a large financial institution, and they had brought all of their heads of businesses to Japan. And I was doing a points of view workshop called My Story. And, you know, they come into this beautiful room. I can't remember where it was, maybe, anyway, a lovely hotel in Tokyo. And I've got the cards on the floor. And there's, you know, aromatherapy, there's music, and, you know, all these suits come in. And
how many suits are we talking? Are we talking about a lot of suits?
30. It was about 30 to 40. Yeah. Very senior, you know, lots of pinstripes going on. Lot of like finance guys. There were a couple of women in the room, but I would say it was like maybe 20% women. And they were from all over the world. They come into this room. And the one guy says, so we're gonna sit down and hold hands, start chanting. I said, that's what you want to do. You're very welcome to. And then, you know, so he was really skeptical about it. But I just invited everyone like to kind of, I guess, I didn't say bring your karaoke self, but like be in this room, trust the process, and see what is the different data, what is the different intelligence that you can get from having a different type of conversation. Because everyone is in this room because they're amazing at their job. You're a really high performer. You're very eloquent. You don't get to the role that you are without being able to, you know, talk about what's going on. But maybe some of that focus on the verbal is hampering your ability to access different types of information. So let's pull out some more data from this conversation. And some of you will get really deep insights from it. And some of you will just have had a nice 90 minutes and a bit relaxing compared to some of the others. And again, everything is okay. And at the end, when we did the takeaway, this guy said, yeah, I was really surprised. I feel less alone. And I was like, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering. I thought, you know, I thought I was the only one having these types of problems. And through this experience of sharing our stories in this way, I just feel like I have other people that I can reach out to who are outside of my business. And I realize that the things that I'm experiencing are not just for me. And I was like, wow, from that level of vulnerability, that's almost, you know, complete change in his perspective from when he'd come in as so cynical to be able to move someone through that in 90 minutes. I just felt like what a gift of a job I have, how lucky I am that he could get that shift. And, you know, and as he was saying it, many people were, you know, kind of nodding around the room as well. So it wasn't just a one. So I don't know if that answers the questions about metaphor, but people absolutely. Are sensitive about it's so woo-woo, and I'm like,
I mean, I think that's a great example. And for me, one of the things is is about story, you know, and it wouldn't make sense for you to just say, oh, there was a guy who had a takeaway and he said that he didn't feel alone anymore, you know, because people would listen and say, well, you know, gee, good for you, but you have no idea the kinds of people that come into my meetings or come into like my workshops. And I, like you, have found sometimes the biggest no people are actually more engaged than those that are like whatever, because then I found there's two kinds of no's. There's the NO and there's the KNOW no. So when you first meet someone, you're like, and they're saying no, is this no, I don't know enough, I don't know enough to trust you yet, or is this no something that they don't have the ability to be able to make a decision, for example. And for example, with this particular story, for me, that also resonates because I've had many people also walk in like that as well. And what I've found is you and I trust our processes. You trust points of view. You trust systems coaching because how many thousands of hours have you worked with it? You know, like I don't even know how many multiple thousands, but lots, right?
Yeah.
And so of course you have a trust in the system, and you have people walking in the door for the first time. And of course they've worked exactly 0 minutes, not even hours, like minutes with this. How could you possibly trust it? So what I've found when you're introducing these, as you mentioned, woo-woo concepts sometimes, is to help people. I don't even tell people to trust the system. I just say, if you feel like you can trust me for the next 90 minutes, feel free to stay. If you don't even feel like you can trust me, then feel free to use your time in a better way, because there's no way you could possibly translate all the benefits that you've seen in points of view and systems coaching in 90 minutes, you know, even after them going through the workshop, just simply holding space and saying, you know what, I promise I'll get you to where you need to get. Just trust me, you know, without kind of like trusting the system. What else do you do to hold space for people to talk about those metaphors? Because I can imagine when you pick up, for example, like that picture that you just showed, which was, you know, a baby shoes, 2 little bows. So it's suggesting that it's female, like it's suggesting that it's a baby girl. They're also like not worn. What does that mean? They're not like worn shoes. They're not dirty. Like, have they been worn? And then there's this gentleness. Why gentleness? And like there's so many, as you mentioned, so many different ways that the conversation can go to. How do you create space in order for people to really take you up on that invitation?
I think that in the points of view methodology, you know, we always begin with a pause. So we have a moment where we tune in. We often will like listen to music for a couple of minutes with our eyes closed and just check in with ourselves. So that already sets the scene that you're shifting into a different part of your brain, a different sense of awareness. So leave what's happened of the day so far behind, check in with yourself and just slow down. And then the main part of the points of view process is in expanding. So it's this divergent thinking. So really allowing people to know that there is no one way to see the card, to reminding to have an open heart. And also the biggest kind of call to action is to break patterns in points of view as well. So to be very much, you know, if you're normally the type of person who speaks last, try and speak first. If you're normally the person who speaks first, speak last. If you feel like you're going down a set path, notice that and try to break it. And one of the great things that I love with points of view is we have the rule of the deck. So if you get a card which you really are not comfortable to talk about, always remind people you have the freedom to change it. But please check what your resistance is. Because that resistance could be like, this is the breakthrough. You know, maybe you don't know what the connection between this image and gentleness is. Because actually, when I look at that card, I'm like, these shoes to me are the opposite of gentleness. They're like
they're like
forcing a little
leather.
baby's feet into these like painted shoes. So, you know, it's but I can also see the gentleness there. But for me, it's like, oh, this is actually nothing to do with gentleness. And that tells me more about me and my perspective of the world. And just to challenge that, and to, when you feel that resistance, be really curious about, it's a little edge here. What's going on with that?
Yeah, to hold space for that learning. Yes. One thing that I love to do with the Business Karaoke podcast is to ask people how they want the listeners to feel afterwards, right? So not only what they want to talk about, how they want the listeners to feel. And you mentioned that you would love people to feel excited about metaphor in their business, whether it's even in their next business meeting. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Just feel like it brings such a different energy into the room when you encourage people to like, let's play with a metaphor. Let's see how far we can take it. Let's challenge ourselves. Let's see where our metaphor breaks. And it can be as simple as just ask, like, how are you today? Instead of that, why don't you share, like, what's your internal weather? Or if this project had a theme song or a character, what would it be? Just these like daft questions, they bring an element of lightness. But I was doing a online workshop. It was like for a client in India. There was like 200 people in this webinar. Oh
my gosh.
And but I couldn't talk to them. So it was only through chat, which actually we're on Teams. And at the end, I said, okay, so please share, the image that you're taking away with you of who you've become afterwards, like as a superhero. And the chat went nuts.
Yeah, blew up.
Absolutely. Just, they've been before, like when we've been in the verbal, there've been like a couple of comments and stuff. And it was just like, whoa, where have all these people come from? And then there were like, everybody was like liking everybody else's comments. And it cut through really quickly what people wanted to say. And then, of course, you could go in and say, well, what is it about that superhero? But I couldn't in that workshop because of the way it was set up. But it was just interesting to see how excited people were to like break out of into a different communication style. And we're not writing poetry here. So we're just, planning the marketing campaign. Or whatever it is that you're doing. Just try it a little bit. Like if this project was the greatest success it could be, what would the theme song we would play be? What's going to motivate us like that? Like, it doesn't have to always be about the image, or like, what would it smell like? If it was a fabric, if it was an item of clothing that we'd put on, different metaphors work for different people. And if it's a coat, like, how does it feel? What are the buttons like? You can get into all these layers and everything. It always surprises me how much people get into it. But from a business perspective, then you have to have this convergent point where you go, focus. So what?
Yeah.
So what? So we've had all this awareness. We've had this great expansion. What's the Cobra thought that we're going to take away as the insight? And how do we take this into this project or into whatever we're doing now?
Right. So the idea that if this project, or for example, if we think about the theme song, or if we think about if it was a superhero, so, and if we say, for example, it's for example, it's Superman or it's Wonder Woman or whatever, and then we think about, well, what is it? Well, we want it to fly. Or why do we want it to fly? Because we want like less. We want a frictionless, experience for our customers, for example, and the ability to follow that through. So interesting. I, as a facilitator, am always looking for like different ways to engage people, particularly like in the chat in our kind of like hybrid/remote world. And I think I'm absolutely going to use the what's your internal weather. I really like that as well.
Yeah.
And yes, maybe in terms of like, or like checking in to see like people's understanding, like things. I wonder how you'd use like the clothes analogy. Like if this like part of our workshop was a piece of clothing, what would it be? Or like why? Interesting. I'll have to check. I'll need you to like send me like a checklist of like metaphors I can use.
That would be. I don't think I have one, but I
oh my God,
I have my kind of top 10.
You should absolutely make one. It should absolutely be like a downloadable, like a giveaway, like Jennifer Shinkai's like top like metaphors.
Top metaphors.
Yeah, like metaphors. Yeah, that's your next book. Now, speaking, now we're kind of like circling back a little bit here. Now, you mentioned that you wanted to write a book on Ikigai, and you said, okay, that kind of like had to go and pause. And so you had this, you know, Make March Matter community kind of instead. But you also mentioned that you've also experienced a shift in terms of Ikigai in your own life as well. So someone that, you know, has an Ikigai podcast, spends the whole time talking about Ikigai, you actually are living, you know, what you preach. And you've also had a recent learning where you recognized that maybe something was missing a little bit in your Ikigai, and you're trying to create more space for that. So can you share with our listeners more about that?
Yes, and this is all, well, I would say thanks to COVID that I took some action on it. Actually, my awareness had been coming maybe the past 5 years or so. I used to do a lot of art when I was a teenager, and it really was somewhere where I spent a lot of time in flow, and I was just totally always creating things, always like doing screen printing and glass work and all of these different things. Although, so part of my Ikigai is always about like variety. And then I just didn't touch it for years and years and years. And occasionally I did a bit of, you know, hanger, the woodblock printing. And then actually at a Points of View workshop, there was a My Life's Wish List activity. And I was like, yeah, I need to have more life in my art. So I'm very grateful that more life in my art, more art in my life. Maybe more life in my art is
think that works too.
Flip.
Yeah, I was going to say that absolutely works too. Yeah.
But in during COVID, in the first lockdown, a Points of View member actually from Malaysia started this art class. And when I went the beginning, it was mostly adults with a couple of kids. And then over time, the demographic has changed. And now I'm the only adult with a group of kids. And it is my absolute joy going to this class. And an output of it was we started to draw giraffes, because one of the kids wanted to draw giraffes. A kid said, can giraffes swim? So we drew a picture of what would it be like if a giraffe could swim. And then we made all these other stories. And the teacher said, we should write a book. So for somehow in my brain, this went, I should write a book. And so I decided I already had the illustrations. I wrote the story and self-published it on Amazon. And what was great though, so my Ikigai book is still ongoing. I'm in conversation with an agent in New York. It's at its next stage now. So the proposal should be going out to editors soon, but who knows how long that will take. But I was like, I wanted to take the pressure off it being my first book.
What a good idea, Jennifer.
Yes. And so I've published a book now. Great. But what it also made me go is like, what's it like if I do more of this?
Yeah.
Because afterwards someone said, could you illustrate this poem for me? So commission, that's interesting. And so now I don't know what day we're on in the year, but I have done some form of art every single day this year. And I have one day a week that I focus on creative projects. So,
oh my gosh, two things you've said to me.
I don't facilitate, I don't take meetings.
Oh my gosh, two things absolutely I think are super actionable things. One is take the pressure off yourself and get something out there. Anything, whether it's like your first podcast, whether it's your first book, whatever it is, get it out there. So the thing that you actually want to do isn't your first try.
Yes.
Your first try is often not so great, not in a bad way, but like as all first tries are, they're great because they're first, but there's a lot to learn. And I'm sure that probably self-publishing that first book, you learned a lot that you're probably taking through to your next book as well. And the next thing for me was that you mentioned was that to create a consistent space. So maybe you can't do a full day, maybe it's just an hour a week or whatever it is for you, but really putting it in your calendar, because your calendar represents your life, and if you don't have an hour block in your calendar for something that you love, then that's not in your life then, because you can't just love it but it be in the background. If it's not in your calendar, it doesn't exist.
It reminds me, I'm just trying to find where the quote is. Hang on. where is it? Yes. So Jim Fortin, it's a post-it notes up on my wall, which is why I'm looking up here. Jim Fortin's a coach that I've started working with last year. And he says, I don't get what I want in life. I get my habits.
Yes, absolutely. You get your habits.
Yeah.
So you get your meetings. You get your meetings and you get your habits.
Yeah.
You absolutely
get
do.
those things which you do, right? It's not, oh, I want to do this, but actually I'm not spending any time doing it. I don't have the habit of doing it. So get into the habit and then you'll get what you want. Hopefully.
Jennifer, that's so courageous. I mean, you've really done it's a really courageous thing to do. Now, you mentioned that you wanted the Business Karaoke community to get excited about metaphor in their next meeting. I'm not sure how your listeners are feeling, but I'm excited about using metaphor absolutely in my next workshop, and I run a bunch of workshops, so I'm excited.
So watch out. Watch out, Brittany's clients.
So for anyone listening, know that you're getting metaphors are going to come in hard and fast over the next couple of weeks as I learn how to use metaphors, and I will absolutely report back how that is going. Jennifer, I just wanted to take a minute and just celebrate you for the work that you are doing for Japan and the solopreneur community and entrepreneur community with your Make March Matter. Anyone, if you are interested in learning or just connecting with some more entrepreneurs or business people in Japan, go ahead. I'll add all the links how you can connect to this group. It's a wonderful place to be. It has wonderful people. And I just wanted to thank you for holding space for these difficult times and these difficult conversations. It's really I feel better knowing that you're part of our Japan global system. It gives me more hope, more confidence that we can kind of get through these difficult questions and come out the other end, if not better, okay, if not better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And, every time having a conversation with you, it's always so much fun. You have such great energy. And I'm really grateful for everything that you've given to the Make March Matter community as well, and through all you do with design thinking too.
No, of course. And my only thing is that because of our time difference, that I can't make it as much as I would like. And then when I can, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. But that being said, Jennifer, you mentioned on your podcast that we would one day be real friends, like back of the head friends, which means that we've seen the back of each other's head. We've seen the back of each other's head virtually, but I'm sure I'm looking forward to, exactly, the roots. I'm looking forward to seeing the real back of your head one day, and know that you're a very good friend of the Business Karaoke podcast, and welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And I look forward to hearing all of your listeners and communities' experiences with metaphor. Yeah. See what
my gosh, Jennifer,
conversations come out of that.
I just remembered, in our preparation talk, you were like, I wish I added the blah, blah, before and after in your podcast. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
I just remembered I actually wanted to ask you something. Okay. So if who you think about yourself, right now, your business, everything that's going on, if that was a metaphor, if your week was a metaphor, or if you, let's try, let me see if I can test out my metaphor skills. Wait, if you were an animal swimming, if your business was an animal swimming, what would it be?
I got it. I am is it an otter? No.
Yes.
Nako. Is it Nako? Is that otter, right? I can only think of the Japanese. That's weird. So I'm just kind of I love how they lie on their back, and they have they put the shell and they use a stone to open it, but they're just really relaxed about it. I always think they look like they're having a cool time. They're using the tools that they have. But they just look quite chilled out.
Did you know they also hold hands when they sleep?
And they're not really swimming, they're actually floating.
They're floating, and they hold hands when they sleep so they don't float away. Yeah. That's which gorgeous. I think is you. This is so might Make March Matter. Yeah.
Oh, they hold hands.
Oh my God.
They have that. There you go. Otter it is.
Oh my God. Business Karaoke people, I'm a facilitator and a podcaster. I ask questions all day long. I've never asked that. And I just got an insight into somebody's business that I promise to you with every fiber that I am, I would not have got that information from Jennifer if I'd had asked her my standard, Tell me more about that questions. Like,
Yeah.
like if you're an animal swimming, like what would it be? And then you're able to like, oh my gosh, guys.
And it also makes you, I'm just, reflecting back my experience too, that it's made me, also, I didn't know about the holding hand things, which I wouldn't have known had we not talked about that. And it also made me reflect on, like what I appreciate about my business.
Yeah.
How I like it. And also its uniqueness, because I don't think otter is the obvious choice, but it came to me so fast that it must be true.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we captured that as well. So it was real life learning. So Jennifer, thank you so much. And again, come back anytime. And honestly, I want that like short list of like, here are some good metaphors to ask.
All
like
right.
if you've got them.
Well, if your business was an animal swimming, what would it be? I think it's been added.
Yes, add that. Absolutely. Yeah. So Jennifer, come back anytime. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.